him, with him, and then we have the accusative direct object of adelphos with the article here. And as I mentioned before, it identifies a specific brother. It's not just talking about a brother in Christ, a member of the royal family of God. It is talking about his physical brother, Titus. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that Titus had a brother, but here we know that Titus was a Greek, and the article here demonstrates to us that it is his brother physically. But what I was saying is that nowhere in the Bible does it say that Luke was his brother. So it is just for us to start speculating as to who was this unknown brother whose praise in the gospel is throughout the churches, whom everyone knew about. Who else was in the journey of Paul? Who was with him all these days? Second missionary journey and beyond. And it was Luke. We know it's not Timothy. He's out. He walked out on the Corinthians. He's still going to have another chance, but in a different church. It's not Apollos. He walked out. It's obviously not Titus. It is not Silas. It is not Epaphroditus. It is Luke. And here, Luke was the one that was praised among all the churches. He was the historian, and he was with Paul in most of his missionary journeys. So Don Adelphon, his brother, we're going to translate it. The article is going to be translated possessive. His brother, and then we have a relative pronoun in the genitive of whose, but let's go with the nominative here. But look what it's going to do. Ho epainos. Epainos means praise, eulogy, acceptability by all the churches. They know him, that he has a good reputation, and that he is a doctrinal believer, and that he does have a history of being consistent in the work of the Lord. Therefore, praised. He is praised by all the churches. So what do we have in the nominative? The praise of whom? Is that better? That's better for me to explain it. Because we have the brother, and then we have this relative pronoun, the brother of whose the praise. So it's in the nominative here, the praise of whom. Why does it begin in the nominative? Because now we begin a new clause. And we send with him his brother, the praise of whose praise. There we go, better. Whose praise. But if my way helped you understand this construction better, then so be it. Whose praise is, we have an ellipsis, no verb here. The ellipsis is after gospel, but whose praise in the gospel, n plus the dative of sphere. In the work of the gospel, we have a brachology, where we add a few words here. We know that it's gospel, yes, but it's the work of the gospel. He was engaged in accompanying Paul and in writing down a lot of the facts that were happening. In fact, he's going to accompany Paul in his journey back to Jerusalem, in his reversionistic journey, and he's going to be locked up with Paul for a while. He's going to be in that first incarceration after almost dying the sin unto death at Caesarea. In that first incarceration at Caesarea, he's going to be with Paul in that second incarceration, which is going to be that first incarceration in Rome, and also the last incarceration, which is the second incarceration in Rome, that led to Paul's death. So the praise of whose praise in the work of the gospel. This is a brachology. Whose praise in the work of the gospel. And then dia plus the genitive of pas plus ton ecclesia. Through, pas on all, and then plural of ecclesia and the genitive, through all the churches, the local churches here used in the plural. We add the ellipsis, the verb, between Evangelion and the whose praise in the work of the gospel is through the churches, is throughout the churches, throughout all the churches. All the churches know about him already. He's formed a good reputation for himself, not only as a doctrinal believer, but as a consistent man of character. He's there, and even though they're suffering every day, he still remains there. And yes, he was a man with a lot of character, because we know that he was there suffering every single time that Paul was undergoing suffering, except that reversionistic suffering that Paul had to suffer, that was only for Paul. Thereafter, he did suffer with Paul in all his imprisonments. So we have a translation now. What does it say? And we sent with him the brother whose praise in the work of the gospel is throughout all the churches. Okay, good. Let's look a little bit at the profile of Luke. Luke, the brother of Titus, he's a doctor and a historian. Why is he a historian? Because the book of Paul, the book of Acts, is a history book. The book of Acts helps us to see the transition between the great power experiment of the hypostatic union to the great power experiment of the dispensation of the church. The Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, helps us see the great power experiment of the hypostatic union, the first advent. It helps us see the Lord Jesus Christ, how he went and administered to the Jews in the dispensation of Israel, but it also prepared the way for the new dispensation, the dispensation of the church. They can be confusing, but that's why you need a pastor or teacher that knows his Greek and uses 1 John 1:9 and studies. So yes, the book of Acts is a history book, and that's why we call him a historian. He wrote great, wonderfully, and his writings was Attic Greek. It was not just Koine, it was a lot of Attic Greek. Attic is the Greek from the 5th century BC of Athens, in the region of Attica. So he was a writer both of Luke and Acts. Another point is he had perhaps the same mental intelligence as Paul. Part of God's provision, God is so gracious and is so good that he gives you a companion. And in his imprisonment, he needed someone on the same level of intelligence to have great conversations. And that was the man for that was Luke. He was just there incarcerated with Paul. He was indeed a super grace believer, a mature believer. He obviously did not surpass Paul. But if Paul was somewhere in gate 8 of the divine power sphere, well, you bet that Luke was probably right behind it, gate 7 of the divine power sphere. If Paul was in gate 6 of the divine power sphere, then you bet that Luke was probably in gate 5 of the divine power sphere, or closer, somewhere in between. Point 3, in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 18, Luke is described as the brother, the personal brother of Titus. We already know that. We're seeing that right now. Excuse me. Point 4, his Greek was primarily Attic Greek. And if we learn to look at Luke a little bit, the writings of Luke chapter 1, a lot of it is in Attic Greek. And let's see if I can find something that demonstrates a little bit of Attic. I should not waste my time, but yeah, a lot of this is Attic Greek. I'm just gonna go back. So that was point 4. His Greek was primarily Attic Greek. Point 5. He joined Paul in the second missionary journey, Acts chapter 16, verses 10 to 11. I think I said before that he joined him in his third missionary journey. Cancel that right now. Yes, I do make mistakes, and I 1 John 1:9 them immediately. So cancel that right now and put it down on your notes that Luke joined Paul in the second missionary journey, Acts chapter 16, verses 10 to 11. Point 6. He accompanied Paul to Philippi, but was not involved in the persecutions of Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16. In Acts chapter 16, it's not that difficult to put these things together, but Acts chapter 16, there were persecutions for certain reasons. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to go over them right now. There's a lot to go over. But yeah, Paul and Silas were in prison, but Luke was not there with them. He was probably somewhere else in the region, in the local churches. It was not meant for Luke to go through these persecutions yet, for whatever reason. Maybe it was not for him to undergo these because of his spiritual growth, etc. But he was still with them in the same region. Okay, 5.6.7. He accompanied Paul to Philippi, but was not involved in the persecutions of Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16. That was point 6, right? Point 7. When Paul left Philippi, he also had to leave Luke behind. When Paul left Philippi, he also had to leave Luke behind. Acts chapter 16, verse 10. How do we know that? Because in Acts chapter 16, verse 10, the we becomes they. And so Luke was the one that was writing this down. And at first, they say we. But then all of a sudden, after Paul had seen the vision, we got up ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach. Verse 10. It's in the, yeah. So they, okay. I'll check this out again. I'll check this out once again. So verse 10, it becomes they. I think up ahead it becomes they instead of we. It becomes they. I'll check this out tomorrow. Okay. Oh yes, in verse 40, excuse me. So we see we. I just showed you right now that we is in the first person plural. But then once they leave in verse 40, and after Paul and Silas came out of prison, they went to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. Then they left. So this is they right here in the third person, which does not include Luke. And so now it becomes they. It is no longer we. It was first person because Luke was the one that was with them. And that's why he was writing in the first person plural. But afterwards, when they leave, in verse 40, is no longer we in the first person. It becomes they in the third person. Okay? That was point 7. Point 8. But he joined Paul again on his third missionary journey and remained with him all the way to his death. So you can see that Luke was the one that went on this commission to take money to the Jerusalem Christians. Paul was not supposed to go there, but he wanted to be the little estrellita, a little star, kind of like a little hero in his emotionalism. He wanted to demonstrate, show up with the money, wanting to be the one to take the money to his Jewish brothers and all that. But he was not supposed to go there. And poor Luke, he goes along and, and partakes in the sufferings of Luke. Okay. Point 9. Luke went with Paul to his reversionistic journey to Jerusalem. Acts chapter 20 verse 6 all the way to Acts chapter 21 verse 18. That was point 9, yes. Point 9. Point 10. He partook in Paul's incarceration in Caesarea for 2 years and participated in the shipwreck of Acts chapter 27 and Acts chapter 28. So all these things were momentum testing for Paul. And you bet that Luke was also in that momentum testing. I say that they were spiritually in the same level because Paul fell for reversionism. Luke did not fall in that reversionism even though he was still with him, respecting Paul's authority. Luke remained still learning Bible doctrine, even though Paul was in a reversionistic state. So they were more or less on the same level. This shipwreck was part of Luke's momentum testing, disaster testing. I don't know if I read this before, but it was a disastrous situation, and therefore it served as part of momentum testing at gate 8 for Luke, which is disaster testing. Every believer gets the opportunity to undergo a disaster, 1 or 2, at gate 7 of the divine power sphere. Okay. Point 11. He was with Paul in his second incarceration, which led to Paul's death. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11. 2 Timothy 4:11, where he says, "Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in my ministry." So only Luke was the one that was with him, incarcerated. So these were the last days of Paul, and before he was decapitated, Luke was still with him. And then point 12, Luke practiced medicine in Malta, Acts chapter 28, verse 9.